As much as I hate how glitchy and crashy this game can be, it's kind of surreal seeing it break down like this. Today is the last regular episode of Ancient DOS games for the year, and while today's game is exceptionally good, it's also exceptionally prone to crashing. That game being Magic Carpet 2: The Netherworlds. This game also greatly exemplifies why I am not a fan of Electronic Arts. The intention with Magic Carpet 2 was to build upon the original game, addressing all the concerns players had and to give everyone a better experience. The speed problems were nailed down so that the game would never go faster than a certain limit, the magic system was expanded upon, yet using it was made much simpler, and now players actually had various goals to achieve through the course of every level besides just hoarding mana. So what went wrong? Well, from what I've read, EA wanted to shift more resources towards their sports titles and figured Magic Carpet 2 was a prime candidate to shift from since it was getting near completion and because the original game never sold all that well. EA rushed the release of Magic Carpet 2 to make the holiday season, thus it didn't get nearly enough testing or debugging to nail down all of its crash bugs, plus some of the spell features still weren't properly implemented, such as morphing and invulnerability, leading to the game selling just as badly as its predecessor despite being much more advanced and much more fun. This release was botched so badly that it's often cited as the reason why Peter Molyneux, who originally founded Bullfrog Productions, left EA after becoming one of their VPs not long prior. However, if you ignore the game's tendency to glitch out, which is possible to do for a specific reason I'll get into later, then it becomes one of the most technologically advanced games of its time that's both easy to play and chock full of things to do. I'm not going to cover absolutely everything since quite a bit of content did transfer over from the original game, but there's still plenty of new stuff to cover too, so that's what this review will focus on. Magic Carpet 2 was developed by Bullfrog Productions and published through Electronic Arts, first in the UK in 1995, then everywhere else in 1996. It's a 1 to 8 player flight-based first-person shooter with support for both VGA 320x200 and SVGA 640x480 256 color graphics, the latter being much more spectacular but requiring extremely powerful hardware at the time to play it at any sort of frame rate. There's also support for a plethora of sound and music devices, though I recommend using the game's Sound Blaster 16 mode for audio, since many of the other modes only support mono sound output. Granted, the stereo sound is reversed, so that's something you'll need to deal with. My solution is to just put my headphones on backwards. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, but is once again a game that's readily available from the Good Old Games website at www.gog.com for $6, or together with Magic Carpet Plus for $10. If you want a physical copy, keep in mind that there's been a couple releases, including one for EA's CD-ROM Classic series. Either way though, there's little demand for the game, so while it's hard to find copies online, they aren't very expensive. Some people try to charge $30 or more, but really, if you're paying more than $15 for a fully boxed copy, you're spending too much. And a jewel case alone shouldn't run you more than $5 or $6. The story for Magic Carpet 2 follows sometime after the events of the first Magic Carpet game, where our protagonist Zanzibar is out and about walking through his castle courtyard when suddenly a massive evil being appears out of nowhere. Zanzibar quickly ducks into his abode, disappointed that his efforts to restore the world to equilibrium have all been for nothing. Then, as if an answer to this mess, Zanzibar's old master appears before him, and tells him that this evil being is known as Visilith, Demon Lord of the Netherworlds. However, this demon's appearance isn't so much an attack as it is a threat, as Vizilith is actually still holed up in his citadel, where he's commanding his minions to rise forth and do his bidding from. This means there's still a chance, so Zanzibar travels into the Netherworlds with his old master's ethereal guidance in order to bring the fight straight to Vizilith himself and save both his world and the Netherworlds from his tyranny. While it's not an epic story by any means, there are additional details sprinkled in as you go along. For instance, the rival wizards this time around are entirely different, since instead of fighting for control of the world's mana, they're instead fighting for control of various territories throughout the Netherworlds. Also, certain wizards were supposed to have certain specialties as well, but this doesn't really show up all too well as you progress through. Magic Carpet 2 plays almost exactly like the original Magic Carpet, in that you fly around using the mouse and keyboard, or a joystick, and cast spells of varying flavors at the enemies. However, the differences are all related to the content and to the progression, as many elements of the game have changed in the transition, though plenty of things have stayed the same too. One of the big changes though that players instantly became aware of when they first start playing is that you actually have multiple objectives in each level now. As you fly around and complete objectives, new objectives will be given, plus the game is smart enough to skip objectives you've already completed if you complete them out of order, as can easily happen given the nature of some of the levels. Objectives come in one of 5 flavors: flying to a specific spot, destroying specific structures, destroying specific enemies, banishing specific wizards, or gathering mana into your castle up to a specific point. And yeah, there's a lot of specifics. Another thing that becomes apparent right from the start of the game now is that there's 3 different kinds of environments to play in: daytime, nighttime, and caves. Now, the cave flying being a somewhat revolutionary idea at the time, achieved by having a terrain generated not just on the floor, but on the ceiling too. The cave levels, however, are also some of the most difficult, since they're typically very close quarters, and you often have to navigate a gauntlet of rooms and passages to reach an area where there's enough room to build a castle. They otherwise progress as you would expect. Spell selection is also done very differently. In the original game, you would press either the Enter key or both mouse buttons at the same time to bring up your spell menu and map screen, then select a spell using the left or right mouse button depending on which button you wanted to assign the spell to. Here, the process has been incredibly streamlined. You simply hold down the Control key to bring up your spell list, move the mouse cursor over the spell you want to use, and click down the desired button. Then, move the mouse again to select the power level of the spell you want, and then release the button, and that's the spell you end up with. When you let go of the Control key, the spell menu disappears regardless of anything. While it can take a bit of practice to effectively use this spell selection menu, it's ultimately a lightning fast way to select from the dozens of spells available without having to assign shortcut keys. That is one of the interesting things here too, is that while there's fewer base spells overall, each spell now has 3 levels of power, with each greater level being more powerful in some way over the other levels. To get access to these more powerful spells requires that you gain experience with the earlier spells first, which is done either by casting the spell numerous times, or by finding scrolls which improve all of your experience ratings simultaneously. Some spells are really easy to level up since there's few circumstances where you would use them, while others take a massive amount of usage and are otherwise near impossible to level up without the scrolls. There's a huge number of new enemies too, while some of the original enemies have gotten a revamp instead to make them different in some way. For instance, the dragons can now dodge your attacks, making them a fair bit trickier to hit. Plus, in the nighttime and cave realms, you face fireflies instead of bees. Unlike the bees, which attack on sight and get stunned when they hit you, the fireflies will only attack on sight when their numbers are sufficient, and when alone, they tend to just ignore you. There's also zombies, which can steal your mana and pull your spell jars away from you, sentinels, which are ridiculously powerful but can't move very fast at all, spiders that can shoot webs to cause damage and slow you down in the process, and lots more than that. There's even hydras, which rival the wyverns in terms of sheer deadliness. Alas, most of the new enemies are just variants of previous enemies, so there's not really too much to say about them. In fact, the only other thing to say about the gameplay specifically is that there's a new quick save and quick load feature. Now, during any level, you just have to pause the game and you can access a button to save your progress into the quick save slot, or load your progress from that slot. Now, there's a few very important things of note about this. Firstly, you only have one quick save slot, so you want to make sure you're completely done with a particular level before moving on to the next one, since you can reload this quick save from the level it belongs to as many times as you want to, even after you've completed the level, since you can return to any previous levels you've played. Secondly, the game loves to crash, and these crashes are typically triggered when the game engines run for a while and some new graphical element is triggered to load, especially when it comes to the trees, but it can crash entirely at random too, so quick saving throughout the course of a level is essential in case the game does crash. That way you don't have to restart the level. Just keep in mind that if you had been neglecting the save state of your game as a whole, since you can only load a quick save from the level it belongs to, you'd have to somehow get back to that level without quick saving before you could load it again. Suffice to say, you should keep your main game saved consistently from the world map screen too, especially when you find a secret level. In fact, the instant you enter a secret level, quit to the world map and save, since just like the regular levels, you can visit secret levels as many times as you want to once you've found them. Lastly, some people consider these quick saves to be a form of cheating, since if you die without a castle, you have to restart the level, but the quick save feature gets around this. Well, even if you want to play the game that way, you should still keep quick saves anyways, because again, the game can crash in a heartbeat, and while I can understand replaying a level from the start for a legitimate death, I would not be so happy having to do that because of a crash. I'm not going to go over every new spell the game has to offer, partly because some of them are virtually useless and partly because some of them were present in the original game, but I am going to cover a few of the more notable ones, though I only have footage of most of them, not all of them. Firstly, let's talk about the new castle types. When you build your castles now, it's possible to give them fire towers or lightning towers. In order to do this, you need to have more mana possessed than you can actually fit inside your castle, and enough experience with your castle spell in the first place. To get fire towers only takes a little more mana, but lightning towers take a lot more. While it can be tempting to put these towers in place when lots of rival wizards are around, it can be a dangerous prospect since they can just scoop up your mana while you're still trying to go for these things. So to that end, the towers are much better used against the monsters you face, and unless you're the only wizard present in the world, you should probably just stick with the regular castles. Also keep in mind that the fire towers can occasionally launch meteors, and the lightning towers can occasionally launch lightning storms. One of the new spells that's highly underrated is Whirlwind. This spell sends forth a funnel of wind that can pick up enemies and hurl them everywhere. Against powerful targets, it's pretty useless. Against weak targets, though, it's a good way to scatter them and kill several of them in the process. And with landlocked targets near water, it can end up throwing them into the water, making their demise guaranteed. It's also very easy to level up and uses very little mana to cast, but you need quite a bit of mana stored in your castle before you'll be allowed to use it in the first place. The army spell has been changed a bit too. Now, instead of summoning undead minions, you can summon batches of one of 3 different creatures: bees/fireflies, Cimmerians, or wyverns. As before though, these summoned minions can only attack rival wizards, but unlike before, if they can't find anyone to strike, they'll disappear, meaning they won't go after you if you're the only wizard left. A couple of the spells that have been tweaked include Speed Up and Mana Magnet. The Speed Up spell has been changed so that now, if you want to go backwards super fast, you simply have to be moving backwards when you cast the spell. If you're not moving or moving forwards, you'll go forward super fast as expected. The Mana Magnet spell, for balancing purposes, no longer will lock onto a spot you shoot unless it actually possesses something in the process, since doing this in the first game was a good way to rapidly get mana back into your castle following an attack. Speaking of mana possession, the 3rd level of the spell set gives you Mana Lock, which is basically a possession spell that can only be broken by another Mana Lock spell from a rival wizard. Unfortunately, by the time you get Mana Lock, most rival wizards are already able to cast this spell too, so it rarely comes in handy. The 3rd level fire spell, on the other hand, called Firestorm, is like a heavily concentrated meteor in that it can only damage a single target at once, but does incredible damage relative to how much mana it uses. It also requires you to have so much mana stored in your castle that it's one of the very few spells you can't use until after you reach castle level 6. A couple of spells which didn't make the cut from the first game include Firewall and Global Death, though some of the original spells have been tweaked so that they now have weaker variants you can use sooner, such as Meteor, where the 2nd level Meteor spell is now equivalent to the Meteor spell from the first game. Meteor 1 has a very small blast radius and does less damage, while Meteor 3 has a massive blast that can deal extreme amounts of damage, but also burns through huge amounts of mana. However, not all the spells really work all that well. The metamorph spells do indeed morph you into a different creature, but there's not really any advantage to doing so. I guess unless you want to goad an opponent into attacking you during a multiplayer match. The invulnerability spell also doesn't seem to do anything at all, though if the manual is to be believed, you'd have to cast the spell once for every single attack you wanted to buffer, which makes it almost entirely pointless, given that few attacks in this game are dangerous by themselves, and most monsters that can deal tons of damage do so in bursts of multiple attacks at once. There's a Fool's Mana spell too, but it wastes the player's time more than anything else, and the CPU wizards never go for this stuff. Lastly, the Invisibility spell does make you visually invisible, but quite often the monsters will still attack you anyways, so I tend to avoid using it. I don't even know if it works against the rival wizards. Magikarp 2 serves as a great example of how you can completely botch a game release, because this game is almost a masterpiece. It features some of the most technologically advanced graphics for its time, it has a huge amount of content, and as far as sequels are concerned, it kept the original formula fans enjoyed and expanded upon it greatly. However, its constant desire to crash, coupled with some of its spells being left in a barely functional state, combined with terrible marketing, just left this game to rot into obscurity. For a game that's as good as it is, there's virtually no modern clones of it, nor are there any remakes really. I've even considered trying to do my own variant, and quite frankly, I'm surprised virtually no one's made the attempt. I mean, there's Ogre and Carpet, sure, but that game was never completed. And Sacrifice, often considered to be the spiritual successor, is more focused on summoning creatures to do your dirty work for you. Yeah, I've held a bit of a grudge against Electronic Arts for ultimately screwing up Bullfrog Productions, though I do admit, in the beginning, they were the company that made it possible for Bullfrog to make its mark on the industry by publishing their stuff. However, with Peter Molyneux now working on a game reminiscent of Populous, and with the Magic Carpet games now available on GOG.com, I'm hopeful that we'll see more Magic Carpet games in the future. And if we don't, I might just have to get around to making my own clone one of these days. As for Magic Carpet 2, because of its problems, it's a game I can only really recommend to people who like the original game even just a little. If you're a fan of the original Magic Carpet, or liked certain things about the original game but not everything, then Magic Carpet 2 is definitely worth your time and money to give a try. Gameplay-wise, it's better than the original, but thanks to its issues, the original is still the better choice for people who've never played either game and want to give the series a try for their first time ever. And again, both games are readily available for purchase on GOG.com. Unfortunately, this is one of the more difficult games to get working properly on DOSBox, so let's step through all this. Firstly, you need to set cycles to max, otherwise the game will go too slow. Secondly, you need to manually set the CPU core to dynamic mode. Again, if you don't do this, the game will run slower than it should. Thirdly, you should set the CPU type to Pentium Slow in order to automatically have all the detail settings turned on by default. Fourthly, you need to set the Sound Blaster mixer setting to false. This is because the game uses CD audio tracks for many of the voice clips you hear, but the game manually sets all volume mixer levels to maximum when it loads up, and the voice tracks are much louder than the game's sound and music with default settings, which are stored on a per save basis, so every time you start a new game they get reset to default as well. Thus, it's better to use DOSBox's mixer command to set your own volume levels instead of using the game's internal support. Plus, you can't adjust the CD audio volume from within the game anyways. As for which mixer settings to use, I use 70 for the CD audio and 80 for the FM synth, though if you're playing back the music through MT32 emulation or general MIDI, you'll probably need to handle that differently. Fifthly, if you want to use a joystick or gamepad, you need to turn off timed intervals and should probably turn off button wrap too, so you can use buttons beyond the fourth one with the key mapper. Lastly, if you're playing an actual CD copy like I am, make sure to create a QBin CD image pair and image mount it in DOSBox to get the CD audio voice tracks to work properly in the first place. Anywho, that's all for episode 125 of Ancient DOS Games. I'll be honest, this has been a really hectic year, and I'm glad to finally be taking a break from the show for a couple months. And don't get me wrong, I like making these episodes, and I love how well received they've been by all of you. You guys, the fans of Ancient DOS Games, are the big reason why I keep making this show, and you all deserve a massive thank you for continuing to watch and continuing to show your support. But it is a lot of work to do while still trying to work on other projects at the same time, so taking an extended break from it once a year is nothing but a good thing so that I don't burn myself out. Next week is the regularly scheduled filler episode, and I'll be talking about what to expect in the months of November and December, since there will still be a few more fillers following the next one to help pass the time. So make sure you tune in next Saturday to find out what's in store. I gave you a hint though. Since I haven't appeared on camera since I got my hair cut, it's already kinda long again.
Your taste for victory over Visualist's lieutenants is not yet sated. Already they plan their revenge.